What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and today we're going to be breaking down the pivotal hand from the recent WSOP $25,000 tournament where I reached the final table. It was a heads-up tournament, and I ultimately managed to get to about a 2-1 chip lead before punting it all away and getting second place. So today we're going to be talking about the big hand that I played there, and on that note, let's go ahead and jump into the action.
Check.
Our hand begins at the 80,000, 160,000 blind level. My opponent, Chanracy Kuhn, has 3.6 million in chips. I have just over 6 million in chips for the total of 9.6 million chips in play. So this hand begins, he limps in with the 8-6 offsuit. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the pre-flop stuff for short stack because I don't know the answers to some short stack stuff, but my typical takeaway in some of these spots is a hand like 8-6 for him could go either way with either limp or raise. If you raise, you can raise fold. If you limp, you can limp and play post-flop and probably just fold to raises. I don't think it matters too much either way. I think as your hand gets a little bit better than this, you mainly want to limp so that you can call it raise. As your hand gets a little bit worse than this, you probably maybe move towards just limping, or maybe some occasional raising as well. But either way, this hand seems fine. In the big blind here with Queen 4 of diamonds, this kind of hand I think mainly likes to check. I don't hate the idea of raising every now and again, but it gets kind of weird on these shorter stack situations because if you raise and they jam and you have to raise fold equity, it's pretty disastrous. So you typically want to raise hands that you feel pretty good about just essentially either calling a jam or folding. One more thing to think about. The worst hands on the button fold, the offsuit deuces. So basically, when you have a 4 or 5 in your hand, it's a worse bluff candidate than the suited deuces. A lot of times you'll see it shorter stacks. The suited deuce hands do like to raise because you unblock some hands like 8-6 offsuit or 7-4 offsuit or king 3 offsuit that might go ahead and just limp fold. So this hand, I feel like for both those reasons, does end up like just go ahead and check, likes checking rather, which is what I decided to do. And let's go ahead and take a flop.
8-6 offsuit. Is just desperate to notch a victory at this point. And it may or may not do so here as it's top pair up against backdoor diamonds and an open ender.
Feels like a similar spot that, 6 is a nice hand right now, but facing some aggression that Doug can definitely apply with this sort of hand. Okay, so Doug seems like he goes for the check call.
The flop comes 6-5-3 rainbow, and before we get into it here, guys, I just want to let you know that if you want to watch daily PokerGo content on their YouTube channel, you can do so. I'll put a link in the description below, and you can also watch PokerGo's entire offering of live streaming and episode releases from WSOP, High Stakes Poker, and much more, and I'll put another link in there below if you want to check out their content. Okay, back to the hand. So I want to talk a little bit about dynamic here. We're going to pause this hand. I want to talk a little bit about some other hands that had just recently happened. I'm not a huge game flow guy, but maybe it'll give you a little more context for what's been happening in this match so far. So we've been actually battling for a while. It's been a few hours now of us playing heads up. This has been by far my longest match, and the stacks are getting low. I have been doing a lot of betting in different spots in this match. Most recently, there were a couple hands where my opponent had made some pretty big folds. We had one where I had King 5 offsuit, and I essentially just bet turn, bet river on Queen 9, 8, 10, Queen. So I had a missed gut shot, and Chan actually folded a straight. And then we had another hand somewhat recently here where he limped in with Queen 6 suited. I raised with 10 and off in the big blind. He called, and I bet on 6-3 deuce. And this is a pretty crazy hand because when you have top pair in these limp pots, you certainly have to put all the money in either via raising or by calling down. I think that they're both totally fine. And he actually just folded the flop. So I'm not sure if stylistically he just kind of likes to lean more on the hero side, decide what he thinks I have, and go with his read. But certainly a pretty big deviation from game theory to be doing that. I didn't know at the time that he had that, but it does add a little bit of context now in retrospect that I do feel pretty good about bluffing in some of these situations versus him if he's going to be making those kinds of folds. Anyway, back to the hand in question here. Queen 4 versus 8-6, 6-5-3. I flop an open ender and a backdoor flush draw with it over. Pretty great flop for Queen 4. And Kuhn flops top pair, middling kicker. I check, and now he decides to go ahead and bet the flop. I think that this situation, either way, is fine with 8-6. You do have some reasonable playability if you check it back. On a 9 or a 7, you're going to have a straight draw. 9-7 or 4, you're gonna have straight draw, and you also have a hand that you could pretty slam dunk call down with. So this is the kind of hand I might like to check back every now and then. These low boards with a straight like 6-5-3 Rainbow, they tend to have relatively low bet frequencies because if you think about the kinds of hands the big blind would check, a lot of times they're going to connect with these low boards. So this is a flop where you're not going to bet too often, but this hand certainly can make a decision to go either way. He does decide to bet. Now over to me with Queen 4. It's a little bit of an interesting situation because on one hand, my hand certainly has enough equity to raise, but we get back into kind of some short stack considerations here where, you know, if I do raise this hand and my opponent jams, I can't really raise call. So we want to be a little more polar in these situations. We're okay raising with a hand like a 7, or maybe a deuce, or maybe a backdoor flush draw, or maybe a couple overs. But we don't really want to raise with a hand like a 4 unless our 4 is so good that we can then continue versus a re-raise. So for example, if I had 6-4 here, I'm fine check raising. If my opponent re-raises, I can just get it in. I'm fine with check raising a hand like maybe ace 4 of clubs, where if I do get 3-bet, I could probably just put it in. Although that would feel pretty bad. I'm fine with check raising straights. So you can see the kind of 4s that I would want to raise with. I don't really want to raise this hand and check raise and then risk that 3-bet and put myself in a bad situation. So I think this hand mainly does like to call. I want to make one more note about raising in these shorter stack situations. You can't always be scared of getting jammed on, but I do think it is a good framework to come from in thinking about how often am I going to get jammed on, and if I do get jammed on, how upset am I with this hand? And if the answer is really upset, you probably just want to check call. If I do have really strong hands here, like sets or straights, I'm going to mainly raise them on the flop, but I would do a chunk of trapping these hands to look to raise later streets. Okay, so we decided to ultimately go ahead and check call, and let's take a turn.
Potentially as well.
Yeah. Instead, king of clubs on the turn. Doesn't add any equity to Doug's holding.
And it's an interesting spot for Chan. I mean, if Doug is playing appropriately aggressive against his limp here, he might just think he doesn't really have a king. He might think that pre-flop, once he limps and Doug checks behind quickly, it's just like, okay, maybe you don't have a king. Maybe it's safe to keep value betting.
That certainly appears to be a shared thought. 250.
Wow.
Oh, no.
And that check raise you were thinking of on the flop might have just been delayed.
Yeah.
It's just as much. It's just as much pressure as it would have on the flop. Arguably more now.
Agreed. As size-wise, this one is a little heavier.
And really, I mean, perhaps a bit of that time pressure that you were talking about.
Call.
Okay, well. it's not
Doug smelling
fine.
blood.
Yeah. It's a very big river coming.
The turn comes the king of clubs, a very interesting card here. I check it over to Kuhn once again, and this is where our hand starts to heat up. So I kind of think with Kuhn's hand on the turn, I don't really like betting very often. Now, I don't do a lot of short stack work, so I can't tell you for sure that this is wrong or bad or anything. Maybe it's just totally fine, I'm not sure. But when I bet the turn, I use a single size, meaning that I don't have a small and big split on the turn. I either just go big only or small only, meaning that when he bets 250K here in a 640K, this is just something I would legitimately never do. So the way I would approach this turn is I would bet only a very large size, let's call it just pot here, or maybe even a little bit over pot, geometric, or I would check. So that means when I'm in this turn spot in Kuhn's shoes, I'm doing a lot of checking, and when I bet it's big and it's polar. I'm probably gonna barrel you if you call the turn. I'm gonna have a bunch of good hands, and I'm gonna have some bluffs, and you gotta figure out how you're gonna deal with that, which is tough to deal with. This is more of like a sprinkling of a little bit of thin value in there, which is kind of interesting because we had a hand earlier this session where I had an ace 6 on ace 4 4 3 2 spades, and he did this exact same thing where he tried to bet a lower pair to show river down, and that's why he also had a flush draw. But basically, I had seen this spot before where he had gone the small size with a thin value bet, then wanted to check the river. So a couple things going through my mind at this point. First off, I think he's splitting the turn. You know how I just said I only have the big size or I check? I think he either has big, small, or check, which is much harder to balance. You have to be able to fight appropriately against the check raises with hands that don't really like to face them. Again, this is the kind of hand that likes that small size that he used, but would he do this with a king? Would he do this with a straight? Would he do this with a set? Would he do this with two pair? It's unclear to me. I can't say one way or another. Anyway, so we definitely want to have raises against this size because we don't want to allow what happened earlier to happen when we have a hand like Queen 4 where we just call twice and check river. We need to put some pressure on him. So the question becomes, what hands do I like to put pressure on? Well, kind of going back to the flop, right? We didn't like check raising this hand because it was so good. We wanted to check raise hands that were more like backdoor flush draws or 7. On the turn, this now makes a nice check raise hand because if I get jammed on with Queen 4, obviously I'm not excited about it. I lose the pot and I lose a big pot. But I don't lose a terribly huge amount of equity. I just lose my open-ender, which is also not even to the nuts, right? There are, of course, going to be stronger straights that are available on both cards. So I'm totally fine with that. I'm not going to hit a backdoor flush. I'm less happy about a queen. A 4 is a terrible card. So all of a sudden, this hand has some really nice check raise properties. So those two things kind of both were at play in my mind. I did randomize between some call and some raise in this situation. And I ultimately landed on raise, and it is time to go. And as we all know, kind of the MO of my strategy is bluffing turns with straight draws to bluff river and getting stacked. Shout out to the hustler. Anyway, okay, so back to the hand. We need to go a size, sets up a nice size river jam. I ultimately decided to go for about 900k. I think this maybe should have just been a touch bigger to make it a little bit more geometric, but I do think that ultimately this was about right. I don't know, maybe this was probably about right. Anyway, so back over to Kuhn now with the straight draw. You're not super thrilled about the situation that's developing. I honestly feel like, man, I mean, I guess you call the turn if you bet, but I might fold the turn with 8-6 because let's just think about this. I want my opponent to have 7-8, 9-8, 9-7. I block some of those, and then I do block some two pairs and stuff, but I would have plenty of King X hands. But then again, he's probably splitting up his range, so maybe he does need to call with this hand. Either way, I'd rather have like Queen 6 or Ace 6 or 5-6 or 6-4 or pocket 7s or 6-7. Or all these hands seem like better hands or have better playability. What rivers are good for the 8-6 here, right? I mean, an 8 or a 6. Other than that, they suck. Deuce, 4, a 3 or a 5 are pretty good. Because it's unlikely I have two pair now. It's less likely I have two pair. But a deuce, a 4, a 7, a 9. None of these cards are very good. Anyway, if he is splitting, he probably has to call. But if he only has one size, he probably doesn't really need to, I imagine. Anyway, he ultimately decides it is time to call. He makes the call, and let's take a river.
Yeah, digging in. Now, on the river, another overcard. To the 6, not sure how much of it Kuhn is going to think is contained in Doug's range, but Polk just jamming.
Wow.
This is a call for your tournament life with a pair of 6s. Some of that straight draw, flush draw combo kit factoring into the turn check raise for you guys?
Yeah.
In terms of hand class that we beat?
The river comes the offsuit 9, my money card. Now, this card's a very interesting one because if I had 7-8, I've hit the nuts, which is a very nice turn check raise candidate, right? Because we have no showdown value, but we have a nice draw, so that would definitely be a hand I would check raise turn with. If I have a hand like King 6, King 5, King 3, I'm very happy about this. If I trap the straight raise turn, I'm very happy about this. And if I did check raise a strong king, like let's say I just check all the flop with, let's just say King 9, then that one's less likely. But let's just say I did, then now all of a sudden I have a very strong value bet in the river as well. That one's not very likely. Okay, so that's the first thing. I definitely have lots of good hands, and my bluffs have gotten there. Some of them have gotten there. If I have clubs, a lot of times club hands will check raise to check fold the river. But what kinds of clubs do I have? I mean, I'm going to have, if I'm bluffing the turn with clubs, it's got to be either really bad clubs or clubs so strong I'm fine to call jams. So maybe I would have like 9 deuce of clubs. Maybe I would have like, see, I wouldn't check raise 9-7 of clubs because if I get jammed on, what do I do? So 10-9 of clubs, but then I'm probably raising pre-flop. Kind of hard to imagine too many club hands. Maybe jack 8 of clubs. Could be a reasonable one. Anyway, the point is I will have some club hands, but I do think overall the club hands make more sense to check raise, check fold. And what you really want to do is you want to be check raise jamming with missed straight draws. Now, it would definitely be better if I had a hand with a 7 or an 8 in it. But I don't think I have too many of those, right? Because what hand would just check raise the turn with a 7? It's really 7-8, 7-9, but those have both gotten there in some fashion. So the point of the matter is, when you check raise these straight draws, you really need to be looking to barrel when stuff bricks and other hands get there. This fills all of that criteria. And even though I do feel like my image is not particularly awesome when it comes to running big bluffs, I think this hand is just a mandatory bluff candidate. So we fire the rest. Over to Kuhn now with a 6. So this actually is a kind of more reasonable river for the 8-6 because now you do block 7-8 and you do not have a club in your hand. You wouldn't want to have a low club. So those two things make it a much more reasonable river call. In my mind, it's still kind of tough to put a lot of bluffs in my range. Like, you're really kind of hoping I have ace 4, queen 4, jack 4. I can have 7-8. I can have king 6, king 5, king 3. I could have some trap straights. Anyway, the point of the matter is he can have missed clubs, and he also does block 7-8. So from those perspectives, it's a kind of reasonable call candidate. I think it's a little ambitious to call down here. I think that you're going to have to hope that you're playing somebody that's really aggressive to profitably call this down because simply so much stuff has gotten there. But I got to give some credit to Kuhn where credit is due. He correctly deduced that I was bluffing in this hand. And, you know, the thing is, one of the beauties of heads-up poker is you just get to play so many spots and you get to play so many hands and see so many situations. And maybe he just had reached a point where he just thought that I was going too ham and had to put his foot down. But either way, Kuhn, facing an all-in for his tournament life, makes the play he has to make.
Call. You win.
And he makes it.
Nice hand.
That's a very good call.
I thought. Nice hand. 8-6.
8-6, finally.
Nice hand.
Anyway, after that, I lost. See you guys again next time.